Let's review what we covered in this last section of Tutorial 7. Let's review what we've covered in the last section of this activity. So we added a number control, and that's an input element where the type is number. And that gave us a text box, but the text box had a spinner, right? An arrows that you could click up or down. And in the virtual keyboard, it'll use the numeric virtual keyboard for this type. And then we learned about some attributes that we can use on that. And that is the value. We can add the value attribute, and that tells it what the initial value is when the page loads. We can set a minimum and a maximum for the range of numbers that can be used. As you click up and down, you can only go to 0 or up to 20 in this particular case, but you can put what numbers you want. And then the step identifies how big of a step each time you click it, how much it steps to the next number. We added a slider widget, and this is a widget that you can enter that has really actually a slider, right? Where you have a widget that you can click on and drag to change the number. And to get that, it's an input element with type range. And when you do this, you can also use those same values, the initial value, a min and max to say what the range of the slider is and what the step is between values across that slider. We learned how to use a data list to supply options for the user to select. So we had an input element. It was just of type text, so we just got an input element. And then we created a data list with a variety of options in it. And then we connected them together by using the list attribute in the input element, adding the list attribute, and using the value of the ID of the data list. And this connected it, and what it does is it provides suggestions, and the user can either select something from the suggestions or they can type in some other text. So it's just ideas. Then we learned about buttons. So there's the command button. It's an input element of type button. And now the value on this will actually produce a button in the form. And then the text, whatever you put in the value in that text will actually show up on the button. And then the command button has an on-click attribute with a function call. And what this does is it actually calls a function when you click on it. Now we didn't use this one, but it's good to know how they work. We did use this one. This is a submit button. It's an input element, and the type is submit. And in the value, you put whatever text you want actually on the button. And what happens is this actually submits the form for processing. Then there's the reset button. It's an input element. The type is reset. And again, the value, whatever you type in for the value of value is what will show up on the button. And what this does whenever you click it is it resets all of the form elements to their default state. So that's a reset button. Then we learned about client-side validation. Now, it's really important when you're gathering data from a user that data is validated. It's a real security issue to not validate it. And so on the client side, we really just do a very initial validation and it's not very detailed. On the server side, you want to do really robust validation. But we're not going to learn how to do any server-side validation at this point. So all we're doing is the client-side validation, and that's what can be done right in the web browser before the form is actually submitted. And what we learned about was that we could add a required attribute, and what happens then is it actually won't submit the form until there's something in that particular field. We learned that there are some data types, like the email input type, that validates the data automatically. And so it validates that it looks like an email address before it will let it be submitted. And then we learned the pattern attribute. And the pattern attribute allows us to use a regular expression to compare the pattern against. So they have to enter a value that matches that pattern expressed by the regular expression. So some ways to do client-side validating. And then we learned how all of that validation showed up when we submitted the form. But then we learned how to set the style so that it was more responsive and that it actually gave the user feedback right away whether what they were entering in that particular field was either valid or invalid. And to do that, we used the pseudo classes focus, valid, and invalid, and we combined them together, right? And then inside the style, and we used that for the selector, and then inside the style block, we could set whatever style we wanted. And that style would be applied when that element with that ID was focused on and what was currently in that field was valid. And then we did it for when it was invalid as well. So a way to let the user know right away when what they're entering is correct or not. And that's what we've learned about HTML forms.